Okay, hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Lance Beck. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Spokane Valley Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our partners at Greater Spokane Incorporated and the West Plains Chamber of Commerce, we're thrilled to welcome you to this morning's Joint Chamber Business Resource Call here. Today we are going to go in depth on the small business and nonprofit grant program that has just been rolled out through Spokane County. And so we've got two speakers with us, both Cindy Wendell from GSI and Mason Burley from the Innovia Foundation, our subject matter experts on both the small business side as well as the nonprofit side of this grant program. And so our teams have been working hard to develop the application process and then the award process as we go through this. And so we're hopeful that today can serve as a great opportunity to answer any questions. It will be primarily a Q&A session today. We'll go through some of those FAQs that we've seen coming up from both sides of the program. But as we get started, I want to introduce both Cindy and Mason. We'll do a quick introduction here, so let you both unmute your mics there. We'll start with Mason. Maybe Mason, give us some background and just an introduction for who you are.
Hi, I'm Mason Burley. I'm Director of Research and Community Impact at the Innovia Foundation. The Innovia Foundation is the community foundation for Eastern Washington and North Idaho. We've been around since 1974 with some different names, but we are the philanthropic response in this area for community members, and we normally provide grants about $6 or $7 million a year to area nonprofits, and also are engaged in other initiatives throughout the community. And we're happy to be involved with this effort with GSI.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cindy Wendell. So I am contracting with GSI at the moment to help with our business recovery efforts for the county. So manage the business recovery and resiliency task force, and have been engaged with GSI as we have stood up the proposals to the county commissioners for the PPE distribution and this grant program, and some future assistance that we are going to be working with the commissioners on as well as we move through summer and fall.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here. We do want to take a moment to just thank the Board of County Commissioners and all three commissioners for their willingness to support this program. Our coalition provided a joint proposal from the group, and so that group consisted of DSP, Downtown Spokane Partnership, West Plains Chamber of Commerce, Greater Spokane Valley Chamber of Commerce, Greater Spokane Incorporated, and Visit Spokane to bring this grant proposal forward to the county. They subsequently funded it at the mark of $10 million, and so we're thrilled to be able to get these CARES dollars out to support our small businesses who have been impacted by COVID-19 here in our community. So with that, we're going to jump through and jump right into the presentation here. So I'm going to start leading off with Cindy. Cindy, you should be able to share your screen now. So go ahead and we'll let you take control.
Okay, let's see if I'll pull this up really quick. Oh, it says you're still sharing. So we'll work on that a little bit. Welcome everybody. Really excited. Mason and I are very excited to have the chance to be here today and help answer questions. Lance, I wanted to thank you and all the efforts of your organization to help get this program stood up and to help get information to everybody. I think what the big goal that we've seen with economic recovery is making sure that any program that we are partnering with is the whole intent is to make sure that every business has the opportunity to be a part of economic recovery. And that is really challenging all of us to really look at how we have communicated in the past, some of the assistance that we're providing, and utilizing different communication channels, utilizing all the partners that we, as possible that we can find, and really asking for assistance. And so really today, what I want to make sure is, before we go into all the details, is asking all of you that maybe you may be here because you're going to apply, you're trying to learn information to help others, really wanted to ask you to help us share this information. If you've got communication channels, if you've got email address lists of business owners that you work with that are suppliers, vendors, please, please, please help us get the word out about this program. The application period is open for 2 weeks. I'm going to share my screen now here and pull up a timeline for everybody to look at real quick. So we basically, this is kind of a little internal document, but I thought I'd share it with all of you so you know kind of what the timelines look like for us. The application period went live on the 10th. And so we have it open for 2 weeks. And we want to make sure that businesses know that this is not a first come, first serve application program, that they can utilize the 2 weeks to get the information that you need to apply that's correct, and that it is, you have everything, all the documentation and information you want to share. It does close on August 10th. Sorry, it opened on the 27th, closes on the 10th at 11:59. All applications are equally considered. The first, the one that came in and the last one that came in. Then we will begin our review period then beginning on Tuesday, August 11th, and work our way through the end of August. You'll notice that this is a pretty, that typically with a large grant program such as this, we do consider this emergency funding, and it is a very quick turnaround and timeline. And so we had a discussion about how quickly we can get funding out. September rents are coming due, payrolls, all of those things we want to take into consideration. So we're doing our best to stand up a robust program that is low barrier, it's transparent, that's inclusive, that we do have an equity lens in all parts and pieces of the entire process. But we also want to make sure that we get funds out to our businesses as soon as possible. So we set a target date of before Labor Day weekend. And so you'll see then that recipients will be notified on the 1st of September. And then we will start sending payments beginning on Wednesday, September 2nd. It won't be complete, but we're going to start that process then. At least everybody that is a recipient of an award will know it. And that way we felt if they needed to communicate with any landlords, make sure that they're talking about their employees and payroll, that they have that knowledge. And then of course, the other applicants that were not selected as recipients, we'll be notifying them as well. And that's a little change. I think we've had some questions about the Working Washington grant, and the communication channel with that process was a little difficult because we had so many and it wasn't the process that we created. And so it was really difficult for us to manage all of those email addresses and get communication out. And so we've changed a few things with this program. Thank you to Innovia. That was a huge reason of us partnering with Innovia, was bringing an experienced grant making organization on board for not only their system software, but also for their internal expertise with their team. And so with that, after the timeline, I'd like to just share a little bit to an eligibility table. Let me see if I'll pull this one up too. And this will help answer a few questions that you may have regarding what it is that we're looking for with the grant program. I'm gonna pull this up next and make sure I'm looking at chats. And I wanna say, Lance, you'll be sharing with us any questions later on as we get into the QAs?
Yeah, our goal for everyone on the call, we'd like you to utilize the chat room here to submit your questions as we go through the call. We do intend to go through our FAQ documents and try and answer. We did have quite a few questions come in through the registration process, so we're going to answer those and we'll pull those up. But then if you have a question that comes up midway through, certainly enter it in the chat box and we'll bring it up to our presenters and have them go ahead and answer those live on the call if possible here. If we don't get to your question for any reason, you'll get a follow-up response from our team here at the Valley Chamber with an answer to that question before the weekend. So feel free to utilize chat. We'll hopefully get through all of these. We do have the full hour for this program to discuss, so we should be able to get through most of them.
Perfect. Thanks, Lance. This is on our website. I want to encourage everybody that if you have any questions or if you are just beginning your research on this program, greaterspokane.org is where you're going to want to go. There's a banner there that you can click on to learn more, and it'll take you to our webpage designated to the grant program. You're going to see a lot of links there. One of them is called a parameters document, and this is what this is. And you'll see that we have this grant program does serve both small business and nonprofits. And so on the small business side, I won't go through it individually, but I think you can all see that and maybe have heard some of our eligibility parameters regarding this program. The shared parameters between both small business and nonprofit really have to do with primarily, we want to make sure that this business is serving Spokane County. So the primary location of the business needs to be and/or nonprofit in Spokane County. And has to be, we want businesses to be established on or before March 1st of 2019. There are some questions. I think we've already talked to some individual businesses about being established. The operations may not have been in function in the spring of 2019. They may have been under construction, all of those pieces. And so, but as long as the entity was formed on or before March 1st, then you're eligible. And there is also a common theme of a minimum kind of a gross revenue / operations budget for the two of $10,000 that our organizations must have had that minimum in 2019 or through 2020. If you go over to the right-hand side, there's some documents and information needed. I want to remind everybody too that such a huge part of this process was making sure it wasn't too onerous for a business owner or nonprofit to apply, that we reduced some barriers to make sure that it was not overwhelming and the information that we asked for was not too much really for what the intent of this program is. And this is an emergency funding program, Federal CARES Act funding from the county. It is meant to address business interruption issues and COVID-related expenditures due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So with that in mind, there's a lot of things that make this program very specific and not so much when we talk about it, and we'll probably address these in the Q&As, we always want to go back to the purpose and the mission of what this goal was intended, this grant program was intended to do. And that will help, I think, a lot of us answer those questions. Those of you that are going to apply, help you answer your own questions too about thinking of the intent. So we'll ask for some revenues, gross revenues from 2019 to 2020. However, it's a shortened time frame. We really wanted to isolate some COVID-related, the timestamp on that. So you'll see that's March through June, and COVID-related expenses and some projections for COVID-related expenses, and then some FTE impacts as well. So you'll see those questions on there. Those are going to be the things that you're going to want to prepare ahead of time to have available to you to be able to input into for the small business. And then what I'm going to do now is introduce Mason with Innovia. I can't tell him thank you enough, and to everybody in this group to just how much we appreciate their partnership and what they've done for us. It's been a major lift. I think any of us that have been involved with any COVID-related projects, we get into them and realize that they are much bigger than we ever anticipated, and they're taking a lot of time from us and our staff. But it is a huge community engagement and dedication. So I want to thank Innovia, and I wanted to and just let Mason go ahead and take over now and maybe start addressing the nonprofit pieces. I'll stop sharing the screen, Mason, and then you can pull up the QA doc on the nonprofit side and start addressing those.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. I'm not great at technology, but if it's possible, maybe on your participant button down at the bottom, if you click on that, there's a raise hand. I'll be addressing the nonprofit portion of the eligibility, then send it back to Cindy for remaining questions on small businesses. But if you're from the nonprofit sector, can you click on the raise hand portion of there, just so I can get a sense of how many nonprofit people we have. And while you're doing that, I'll share my screen. Did that work, Lance?
Yeah, it looks good. And it looks like we have some raised hands and some claps as far as reaction. So you got a sprinkling across the board there, Mason. Either are fine.
That's great. Thank you. And we put the URL for the application and the information from Greater Spokane website out here. And if you go to that site, you can click on the Q&A documents, which will have the information, and we will update those as they come in. I'll go over the nonprofit Q&As briefly. Cindy provided some of the background as well, but in relation specifically to nonprofits, nonprofits must be Spokane-based organizations. You might have offices or headquarters outside, but we are looking for those organizations that have facilities or staff inside Spokane. In addition, any of the costs or losses that you claim must be for work that takes place in Spokane as well. Finally, the eligibility criteria and the award amounts are based on COVID-related impacts. So any business disruption or losses that you experience that are related to COVID are eligible. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later with some examples. The additional criteria are similar to some of the small business. We're looking for nonprofits that have been established on or before March 1st, 2019, and have an annual operating budget greater than $10,000 and are in good standing with the Secretary of State and LNI. There are no FTE or revenue caps for nonprofits since they're performing charitable work in the community, and so we encourage all nonprofits to apply. The award amounts for nonprofit organizations. Oh, I'm sorry. The other eligibility criteria is that nonprofits must be a registered 501c3. If you're not a C3, we still encourage you to apply, but we'll ask you to seek a fiscal sponsor that does have a C3 status. And if you're unable to do that, please contact us and we'll work with you to find a eligible fiscal sponsor. So organizations are eligible to apply for grants. Nonprofits may apply for grants up to $10,000. But as said, those are either expenses that have already been incurred from between March and the end of June of 2020, or those that are projected to occur from July to December of 2020 as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those expenses, some examples in the nonprofit sector might involve. When you fill out the application, you'll be asked to complete a worksheet. It's an Excel worksheet where you'll list your losses and expenses that are eligible for the grant amounts. There'll be 4 tabs or worksheets in the Excel file that's there. One will be for expenditures that you've incurred already, so actual amounts for expenditures for PPE or ways that your organization had to adapt to maintain safety in the workplace. It could be for technology, for telework, shifting to telework, for example. It could be for additional staff if you had, for example, volunteers that needed to quarantine and you needed to bring on additional staff and had additional costs. Generally, it's broadly defined as long as there's a relationship to COVID. The second sheet will be for those expenses that you anticipate. Those would be those that will occur between now and the end of this year. Next, we're also eligible to claim expenses on this grant for net losses. And in the nonprofit world, that means potentially lost revenue from fundraisers or events. It could mean decreased revenue from memberships or ticket sales, for example. Anything that might have been affected by some of the requirements for social distancing and limitations on gatherings of people as well. And you'll both include both events that were that occurred, the first part of this year, and those that you might have to change or cancel during the second part of this year as well that you had previously scheduled. I do want to say that it should include the net loss for those types of events. For example, if you had a sponsor that you retained the sponsorship information or sponsorship dollars, that would be netted out of your total reimbursement claim for those. Since this is a federal program with taxpayer money, we are asking you to make sure that all of those costs have some basis and you're able to produce documentation to support both the losses and expenditure claims. These dollars could be subject to a federal audit in 2021, and your grant funds we might have to go back and ask for grant funds back if you were allocated too much. So I think it's just important to be realistic in your assumptions because those are dollar amounts that we will check. I'll go through a few more questions and then turn it back to Cindy. I discussed the documentation. So I'll go through the award process and the priorities really quickly. We'll have a grants committee made up of a diverse group of community volunteers that will select the applicants. But I wanted to mention that we anticipate being able to serve And we want the county commissioners that are directing this funding want to serve nonprofits in a broad range of program areas, including, human services, environment, youth, and the arts, and more. So organizations that are responding to the COVID public health crisis are certainly part of that mix, but also organizations that just contribute to the community in many ways that have been adversely impacted by this public health emergency are eligible to apply. In addition to the financial impacts that you'll report on the application, we'll ask a series of questions about the needs that your organization addresses, the kind of impact you're having on the community, and how COVID has affected your programs and services. The organizations will be looking at for the following criteria when we assess the grant awards. If you're meeting the needs of vulnerable or underserved populations by your organization, we're going to select a broad range of communities throughout the county, including outside of Spokane and city of Spokane Valley. And then we'll also look at, like I mentioned, the need and impact you're having on the community. Finally, I do want to mention that a couple of quick requirements. At this time, like I mentioned, for the nonprofit grant award, 501c3s are eligible, and the following groups are not eligible to receive funds. Churches would be if they have programs that serve the community broadly as well. The second part is you'll also be asked to provide information about previous federal grants or dollars that you received under the as part of the COVID response. That would include PPP loans. And the reason for that is that the same reimbursement, the same cost claim cannot be reimbursed twice. So that mentions there's no double dipping there with federal awards. So you would still be eligible if you received a PPP loan, or you would still be eligible to apply for this grant, but just recognize that if you claim payroll costs and those costs have already been reimbursed or covered by a PPP award, those costs would be ineligible. Unlike, as Cindy mentioned, the purpose of this grant process is to help organizations be able to reimburse some losses from the COVID response. And so as such, it's not a grants program like we normally do, and there's not going to be any grant report required. However, as I mentioned, some of the documentation about your impacts may be necessary. Finally, is we at Innovia Foundation are managing the technical backend part of this process with our grants software. If you have questions about the application or setting up a profile, feel free to contact us. And if you have questions about the nonprofit process in particular, contact us at Innovia, or info@innovia.org. And I'm happy to answer questions later, but I think I'm going to send it back to Cindy or Lance for the remaining small business information.
Perfect. Thanks, Mason. I am going to share my screen now with our small business Q&A, and we'll just start kind of going through there. And I know that there are a few questions. I think what we'll do is I'll go through this document, and then we will I'll toss it back to Lance, and then Lance can kind of moderate some questions between Mason and I regarding small business questions or nonprofit questions. So what qualifies as a closed business due to government mandate? I'm just going to kind of go through some of these questions right off the bat from the top. And if you'll notice, and I need to go maybe and refresh my screen, so I'm actually going to stop sharing because I do believe we have a new one today, and I'm going to refresh this. We are trying to refresh this document for you daily at the minimum. If we see some questions come in, that we are trying to make sure that the information is as up to date as possible. And so here we go, updated as of today. So let's talk first about probably the most common question we're seeing with this application is what qualifies as a COVID-19 expenditure for your business. And one thing I want to lean on and remind everybody is there is an attestation in this application that the owner is attesting that this information is correct. And also, like Mason mentioned, because this is a federal funded program, that you will be able to produce documents that confirm all of your numbers and the amounts. And so when we talk about COVID related expenditures, we wish it were a very, it's either this or this, and it just isn't. Businesses, as we all know, are as different as people. And so what we are asking you to do as a business owner is to understand the intent of this program and understand the intent of what a COVID related expenditure is, and that you are the one that decides as a business owner if that is something that you are going to declare in your application as related to COVID expenditures. So with that, they may include, what we want you to remember is, would this have happened? Would I have experienced this expense had COVID-19 not happened? And if it is something that is related to your normal operation of business, then on the very first part of it, it would not be a COVID related expense. But however, you'll see payroll is our first one. If there were dramatic changes to your payroll, or you did not receive any income due to you were forced to close, service was reduced, then your payroll could be considered an eligible expense, because due to COVID, you were not able to fully fund your payroll. So when you look at some of those things, how you want to put in which buckets you've already maybe received federal funding for, like PPP, you may want to look at your other expenses for this grant that is a maximum of $10,000 for businesses and nonprofits. If you are a sole proper contractor, your max is $2,500. So we just want you to kind of gather all of your expenses together, really pay attention to what you want to apply to this grant to help these funds cover. Because again, we don't want you double dipping, but we also want you really taking some time and assessing what might be considered a COVID related expenditure for your business. Rent and mortgage payments, again, in the same breath as payroll. If you were not able to make rent because of a reduction in gross revenue, also, if your business was forced to close or vacate your location and your team has to work remotely, then you can consider that rent and mortgage as COVID related expenditures. Utilities, vendor payments, some debt services. Again, if the ability to repay the debt was significantly impacted by COVID-19, then you can consider that a qualified expense for COVID. Shifts in operations, expenses for acquiring PPE. This also includes adjusting the flow of your business. If you had to maybe take out some tables, if you had to reconfigure, if you had to go through some construction just to satisfy social distancing measures in your business, then look at that and really think about how that can be considered as a COVID related expense. Expenses for cleaning your facility, the extra, say you had to increase your cleaning contract because of some additional measures you wanted to put in place, that would be considered that change in your contract. Expenses for telework related equipment or technology, trying to get your employees set up to be able to work remotely. And then capital improvement projects, be very careful with capital improvement. Make sure that the project is directly related to COVID. This would be if you had to change your layout, if you had to make some capital changes to the physical nature of your business due to COVID. These funds are not going toward capital projects that were either already budgeted or in the works, or something outside the scope of the impact of COVID-19. And we also talk a little bit about we ask a question on the application is, did your business experience financial loss due to COVID-19? And again, this is what we want everybody to look at is, notices from tenants closing operations or not paying rent. If your business has tenants that were not in operation and they weren't not going to pay rent, inability again to make your loan payments due to reduced sales, the COVID prevention measures, again, the PPE aspect, disrupted supply network leading to a critical shortage of supply and inventory materials, and other circumstances subject to review on a case by case. So just know that have the documentation to tell your story. And so that as you go ahead and put your numbers in, that you have a very clear reasoning behind what you are declaring as a COVID related expense. And a few other questions we'll go for. What qualifies as a closed expense? this or a closed operation, a closed business, if you were required to suspend your operations and close your business, you were considered closed. And in the state of Washington, again, this is a little different as we've moved through the phases and those have all changed. We want to make sure that we recognize, because one of the top priorities of this funding is to help go to those businesses that were not deemed essential, that basically had to, quote, close or majorly disrupt how they conduct business because they weren't in their normal mode of operations. We ask about additional funding that your business received, either from federal, state, or local assistance. And one thing we want to make sure is we ask, there's a difference. We ask about PPP separately, and that's a loan program. And we all know that there's going to be differing percentage of the loan versus grant in that. But when we ask about EIDL, we want to make sure that you know to give us the dollar amount between $1,000 and $10,000 that was advanced to you as a grant portion, not your loan portion with EIDL. And this would be in direct relation to the number of employees that you have. So it would be a whole 1,000 numbers between 1 and 10,000. And do we qualify if we've received federal assistance? You do qualify. We do not want any business that has received funding to be negatively impacted because of that, because we recognize, again, every business is different. The level of funding that you may need compared to another business is different. But we also want to make sure that everybody understands there will be priority given to businesses that were not eligible for any other funding and then did not receive any other type of funding, and this is their sole source. Oops, sorry. Do we qualify if our business was established before March 1st but did not officially open? Yes, you do. The one thing we need to make sure, however, is that did you have gross sales or revenue at least $10,000 in either 2019 or 2020? So if your business didn't open till late in 2019, we also do need to know, however, about your gross revenues and that minimum $10,000. And the NIICS code, this is something pretty standard. Most of you should be fairly familiar with this, but there is a link. If you just Google NIICS, it comes up with a list of these classification systems. We just need you to select which classification and industry section that your business fits into. And the funding we addressed a little bit earlier, but this comes from the Federal CARES Act that the county received a little over $90 million to spend specifically in our county. And we talked about where you can apply, the greaterspokane.org. The application went live on the 27th. It'll be open for 2 weeks. And we talked a little bit about the timeline, when people will be notified and how long will it be to receive the funds. We will be sending those out via check to the address of the account that opened this application. So on that user profile, Mason, I want to make sure that we know, we ask about a physical address for the business in the application, but we are using the information captured on that user profile to communicate with via email and or mailing address to send the check. Is that correct?
That's correct. Make sure that when you register for a profile, the email is one that you monitor and use regularly, because that's where we'll use that for communication.
Perfect. Thanks, Mason. And I talked a little bit ago about the business owner needing to submit the application. There are 3 different short attestations that we need to make sure that those boxes are checked by the business owner. And the marijuana-based businesses are ineligible if you actually have a marijuana-based license in the state of Washington. There are many businesses that are associated with the marijuana industry, whether it's CBD products, those are still eligible. It's just if you actually have a marijuana license in the state of Washington, if that business is based with that type of license, not eligible. And then our parameters for this are 49 or fewer FTE, full-time employees. You may have part-time employees. This actually broadened up the scope of who we could serve through this grant program a little bit by opening up to FTE and not just number of employees. So we recognize we have a lot of restaurants and a lot of those service industries that may have multiple part-time employees. So add up the total number of worker hours, divide by 40, and that will give you your weekly FTE. And ineligible expenses, salary increases, bonuses, dividends to owners and investors. Your business may be one that qualifies, that may be dealing with some hazard pay. Hazard pay has been determined to be an eligible expense that is going toward employees. Ineligible expenses would be increases in bonuses or salary to owners or investors of a company. And again, additionally, the expenses that you can't double dip. So if you use some funding already from the PPP program for your payroll and it covered your expenses, please do not apply for us to cover to double dip that expense of your payroll. Not a first come, first serve program. We talked a little bit about that. Who will decide which organizations receive funding? So we, much like on the Innovia side, the process is going to be similar. We do have two different groups of the applications between our small business and nonprofit, but we will have a diverse group of community representation as well in our review process. We've had community representation through the process of developing the application. And then that same group of people is helping us develop the review process and the information that we need the reviewers to verify on all the applications. And we're still working on the tail end of that piece and then engaging our community partners as reviewers. One thing that we want to make sure that everybody knows too is one part of the selection process, there's going to be multiple pieces to it, but one part of it is actually a lottery system. We're going to be doing a random assignment to businesses in the priority of how their application is determined in as far as consideration. This takes the place of the whole first come, first serve. And so now that we've opened this up for the full 2 weeks, we want you to understand too that your application will come in just as equal as any other application. And then there will be a randomized selection of the order in which we start assessing the application. There are certain priorities that we'll be looking at, and those have been on the eligibility table and well documented and communicated as far as businesses that have been impacted due to forced closure, due to reduction in service capacity. We also prioritizing businesses with high financial impact and that have had zero opportunity for additional funding. The other considerations that we will prioritize, and Mason talked about this a little bit as well, are our multi-ethnic owned businesses. And so any business that's majority owned by a multi-ethnic woman, tribal member, and a veteran will be elevated in priority. And we also ask an additional question: if your business primarily serves one of those communities, including an LGBTQ plus community, those applications will have additional consideration as well. And when we talk about what is primarily serve, go back to your mission statement. Is it stated in your mission statement that that is a community that your organization is specifically there to serve? And or is it more than 50% of who your customer base is and who your business serves? And then the kind of reporting, this is a grant program where the businesses are going to receive the funds up front. This is not a reimbursement program. So you will be, as a business owner, the risk is that over the course of so many months, you could be asked to produce this documentation or not, but we aren't requiring that as far as receipts or anything from you at GSI. You will just be notified that you're a recipient and you will then get a check in the mail. And pre-qualifications, we went over those a little bit. We went over maximum minimum awards. We talked about the priorities as well here. The only documentation required in the application is the first page of your tax return. So if you can please scan that and attach that to your application. We talked a little about calculating FTEs. To know if your business is in good standing with the labor and industries, I did find a link that you can go ahead and just type in your business name and make sure that that report basically is a clean report. And then also for additional questions, make sure that you utilize GSI as much as possible at grantinfo@greaterspokane.org, and then Innovia at info@innovia.org for any nonprofit questions. And we are monitoring those by the hour as well. So I'm going to toss it back over to Lance and we'll start answering some questions.
Okay, thank you both, Cindy and Mason. We're going to jump back up. We had a question come in from Joan. I believe it is, if a business is applying for more than one of their businesses, are they limited to only one application? And so I think this would be directed probably towards Cindy in this instance, but potentially multiple nonprofits under each umbrella. So
yeah, I will take it on the small business side. And if the business has different UBI numbers and there are different formations to the business, then yes, you can submit one application for each of those UBI numbers. If you just have one UBI number with different DBAs, then that is not eligible for multiple applications. Mason, how about you on the nonprofit side?
Similar, if you have separate EINs, employer identification numbers, and are separate entities with separate boards, you would be eligible for multiple applications. Likewise, if you had a nonprofit and a for-profit enterprise, you're eligible for both of those. The key is obviously that you couldn't combine some of your financial impacts. You know, if it's spread across any of those enterprises, it has to be, you know, uniquely reimbursed.
Okay, next question. If a business is showing higher sales in 2020 and net income than the period in 2019, but they would have done even better had it not been for COVID, example being they lost customers and delayed jobs, can they still claim that as a loss? And so I think there's a couple components there. One, within the application, we're searching for the numbers needing to be provided are gross revenue. So that's an important clarification point. And then Cindy, do you want to talk to the point of where in the application they can list the impact of lost potential revenue?
Yes. So unfortunately, there is not an opportunity with the numbers that we ask for to show a net loss or to include a projected income for 2020 and the impact. However, we do have a couple narrative questions in the application, and this is specifically why we want to make sure that your business addresses that in your narrative. Because we ask, tell us anything else you'd like to let us know about your business. That is one section that you can certainly tell the story of your business in. And I want to make sure that I pull up some other narratives that I can give you kind of, how will your business use the funds? How has it impacted your business operations? And why is this grant funding important to your business? Those are the types of things that you can talk about a little bit, why your business is unique and how COVID has affected it. So we can look at that factor.
Okay.
And real quick, I'm sorry, Lance, real quick, both the small business and nonprofit application ask how COVID has affected your operations. So we'll take some of those subjective experiences and criteria into consideration as well.
Awesome. Toby from the West Plains Chamber of Commerce with a question regarding the creation and updating of outdoor seating areas for restaurants. Will those be considered an eligible capital improvement expense if it was done? And so I think that clarification there is that if it was done in order to meet the capacity demands due to the decrease in capacity required by law under the proclamations, then yes, those would be eligible expenses.
Mm-hmm. And we do ask businesses that we do have a place where you can give us your projected expenses through the end of the year, because we do realize that some of these expenses have not been incurred. And so we do want to make sure that businesses are able to tell us. And I would encourage you, any applicants, that if you do have some capital projects, because those dollar amounts will be, we ask for your COVID related expenditures from March through June of 2020. And so say you had, $6,000 of COVID related expenditures for that 4-month period, but you've got a capital project coming up. So now you've got maybe potentially COVID related expenditures more than, double or 1.5% of what you experienced, or 150% of what you experienced for the 4 months. Please explain that in your narrative somewhere, so we're able to understand, because as a reviewer, we're looking at it going, okay, here's their typical COVID related expenditures, but now why all of a sudden are they needing so much more through the end of the year? And we have questions about that. So make sure that if anything seems out of the ordinary or out of the norm, that you are explaining that in your application, so we have an understanding of what that looks like for you and why you're putting that in there.
And that actually answers our next question, whether if a business plans to purchase something like screens in order to bring people back to work in the coming weeks, can they claim those? And the answer is yes, they are in different categories. So if you're, one would be in your expenditures from March 1 through June 30th. The other would go into the projected expenditures between July 1 and in the end of the year. Mason also added into the chat box the search lookup for the NIICS code, and we will make sure we add that link to the Q&A document as well to make it easy to find. But that is one of those questions within the application for you to identify your industry there.
Perfect. Thanks, Mason.
And
Hey, Lance, I thought of something else about related expenditures that we've had a couple questions about, and one is around marketing. And reopening your business. So we've got, every business has, most of them have a marketing budget. You've got ongoing marketing expenses. One thing that we've seen in some other programs or some businesses, they can declare some of their marketing expenditures as COVID related because it was outside of what you normally would have done this time of year. If you are trying to get customers to come back and you're saying, we're open, please come see us. That type of marketing is different than you would have been doing if there were no COVID this time of the year. So make sure that you are looking at those expenses too and really asking yourself, is this different than what I would have had to spend had there been no COVID? Also, we want to talk about too is the businesses, if you've had to adjust to maybe invest in additional technology and infrastructure, more online capabilities, if you've had to pay to enhance a portal and a platform so more customers can order online from your business, all of those things too. Again, that's a shift in business operations due to this COVID related pandemic. So make sure you're looking at all of those factors as well.
Yeah, and the piece that I would add, and again, please do utilize, we've got 13 minutes left on our slated hour here, so a chance to ask the committee members here direct questions. You also have the opportunity, obviously, we'll point to those, the ability to send an email to both the Innovia team or the team at GSI here to get individual questions answered as you work through your application. Do not hesitate if you're confused by a question to reach out to us. Our goal is that your application has sound data on it so that we can make the best decision as a review committee as possible based off of that. And so utilize those email contacts to and have a direct conversation if you're confused on any front. We would say that another big piece to this is obviously the timing. You do have through Monday the 10th to get your application in, and so don't feel stressed about coming up with the information, but do so, get into that application early here so that if you do have a question that trips you up, you have plenty of time to get that answered. The cutoff is a firm cutoff at 11:59 on Monday the 10th, and a lot of that is due to our goal to get the process turned around and get awards made by the first week there of September. And so we're on a very tight timeline to review. The beauty of the process again goes into, due to the volume, there is that lottery element for applications. So it's not a first come first serve. It's important that you provide the correct data. And then that points to the audit capacity due to the funds being federal funds. And so as Cindy and Mason both mentioned, you do need to maintain your records for up to 24 months after receiving the funds. There is the potential that there could be a federal audit on those funds, and you'd need to produce documentation for where you've spent those funds and how you justified the use of those. It is a cash-based grant, so you don't have to provide receipts, which is really phenomenal. We're thankful to the Treasury for that guidance, and both the county and our grant committee for being able to facilitate a program in that capacity. But it does remain on you from a liability stance as the business owners to maintain your documentation for how you utilize the funds should you receive them. So
Lance, can I also mention real quick in regards to preparing your application, like you said, our grants portal allows you to save a draft of an application. So you're also able to get in, set up a profile, start the application, and then make sure you say save, but then you can come back to that before the deadline to complete and submit.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so I'm not seeing any other questions come in. We'll give it just a couple more minutes here, but we'll give everyone back a little bit of their Thursday. We obviously want to thank again the Board of County Commissioners for propping this program up. We're working with several of our communities right now to establish supplemental grant funds. So we'll hopefully have some more great news for additional funding that might be available depending on which community you're looked in. Oh, one other question we had was based on the EIDL question, Cindy. And so the difference between what we're asking for when it comes to an EIDL loan versus the EIDL advance. And we're specifically looking at the EIDL advance is what we're seeking information on. So do you want to explain that briefly?
Yeah, I think for an overall perspective of why is that there's a difference between a forgivable portion of the federal assistance that you receive as a business versus a loan. We understand the difference with a loan is something that you incur as debt as a business. And although it's a great tool, we don't want to count that against you at all for receiving any of that funding. What we really are more concerned about is which businesses have already received forgivable funding that in nature helps go directly to a COVID-related expense. So that's why we pulled out just the EIDL advance portion of that. It should be no more than $10,000. If we see something like that on our application, it's concerning to us, and we've seen a few, which is why we're really trying to clarify it. Make sure that it's a whole number, 1 through 1,000 through 10,000. If you received it, to go ahead and declare that. Again, any other assistance that your business has received that's in the form of a forgivable assistance, not a loan. If you received utility assistance that was forgivable, if you've also received any type of funding like the Working Washington Small Business Grant, if you were a recipient of that program through Department of Commerce, then we want to make sure that you declare that on the application as well, or any other federal type funding in the form of forgivable and grant monies, not loans.
And the key with that again points to the element of should you receive an award and should your award be audited, any misrepresentation of funds or non-representation of funds that might falsify your application would make you liable for repayment of your award plus any cost in the recovery of that award. And so that's in the attestation within the grant agreement there that you'll sign as part of your application. But that is why we stress if you are confused on a question, our teams are available to talk with you and walk you through making sure you're submitting the correct information. Incorrect information could qualify your application to be removed from the pool. And so that's also why it's important. We want in a process where it's going to have a lottery element to this due to the volume of application that we receive, any business that's eligible has a shot at being awarded this funding. And so should you have a question that disqualifies your application from being eligible, if that's a mistake on your application from your part of entering incorrect data, we would hate to see you removed from the pool due to just an incorrect entry. And so we want to make sure you have the correct number. We want to make sure that you have an equal shot at being awarded a fund. And we're here to assist you with that in that process. I see one final question here. I work with a number of small business owners, and they'll make, oh, that's even great, Joan. Never mind. Thank you for helping advertise the grant program. It is awesome. It is available countywide. If your business's primary location is located in Spokane County, you are eligible for this program should you meet the other criteria. And so there is a geographic disbursement priority that we built in. So we will see awards made to every corner of the county through this program. So don't think because you're too small or you're off the beaten path that you're not going to have a shot at this. That is the beauty of the way that we've designed the process to make it fair to every business in applying, that they have a shot at being awarded a grant. So again, contact Greater Spokane's team or Innovia's team, depending on whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit in need of assistance on your application. Make sure you get that application completed by Monday at 11:59. Ideally work on it diligently through next week so that you're not trying to do some outreach, because the process does close at 11:59, and that's whether you have a question that remains unanswered. And so we would hate to see a flood of questions come in Monday night at 10 p.m. because it likely would mean your question would not be able to be answered and followed up to in the same capacity. So you got a whole nother week. We're barely 4 days into this. And so we look forward to working with you to make sure you're a part of the process. So on behalf of my team at the Greater Spokane Valley Chamber of Commerce, Toby out at West Plains Chamber of Commerce, Cindy and the staff at Greater Spokane Incorporated, and Mason at Innovia, we thank you for the time today. We look forward to seeing your application and hopefully helping you find some funds to offset some of the trouble that COVID has caused on your business. With
Thank
that,
you.
we'll adjourn for the day. Thank you.